Hi guys, I want to take a minute and tell you about a story that I heard not too long ago this past week from a friend of mine who teaches at Temple University in Philadelphia. And this story is somewhat disturbing, so if you want to turn back now, I would. But it involves a 21-year-old man with cerebral palsy and quadriplegia who was left by his 41-year-old mother in early to mid-April in the woods outside of their Philadelphia area home with a blanket and a Bible and covered with leaves as she went to Maryland to visit her boyfriend, and he was left essentially to die. Now, when I first received this story early last week, my predominant feeling was, and in many ways still is, anger. How can a mother have so little respect for the God-given spark of life in her son's eyes that this would happen regardless of his physical embodiment? This is abhorrent. And I, as I said, in many ways, still feel that anger. But as I begin to reflect on the fact that the Julian way, as an ethos, and myself as a person with cerebral palsy, needed to respond to a story like this, and as a United Methodist pastor, no less, needed to respond to a story like this, I begin to discover I need another emotion. I need another angle through which to view this story. So this is my attempt to process. This blog is my attempt to process. And I begin to wonder, the story is on the Philadelphia NBC10 website. So if you want to go ahead and read it, I would advise that. But this story goes on to say that many of the young man's aunts and family members were around his bedside as he was in the hospital April 11th and so on. But my thought is, where was his community and his family at 3 weeks before this occurred, when this mother was dealing with such a heavy burden that she felt like this was her only option for a normal life or a better existence, was to leave her son like this? Where was her community? And I really have to question whether I don't put some of that on her church or her faith experience, because obviously she left him with the Bible, so she's got some concept of God or Christ or what the Bible can mean in someone's life. But as a church, what are we doing if we don't lift those who are caregivers up and support them when things get rough? And what are we doing when we don't represent clearly the fact that this son had a story to tell? I guarantee you, if you look in this young man's eyes, it may look different than your story and my story, but there is a story he can tell if given enough patience and time. And that's the church's responsibility, to pay attention to that. Pay attention to caregivers' needs, and pay attention to the fact that everybody has a story. It doesn't matter what their embodiment is, everybody has a story. Secondly, I need to relate this to something that happened to me when I was on pilgrimage to the Disability Civil Rights site in Berkeley, California. In the neighborhood where the disability civil rights movement began, Lisa and I, my wife and I, and our friend Ryan encountered sidewalks that were too narrow, sidewalks that were badly maintained with large cracks in them, and just very difficult to impossible to maneuver around. And this was, as I said, this was Ed Roberts' neighborhood, the founder in many ways of the disability civil rights movement lived here. And he has a great legacy in the city of Berkeley. And these were the sidewalks he rolled down every day. And you had bus schedules that were hard and difficult to interpret for the most savvy and proactive. I can't imagine if it was what it must be like for someone with a disability who isn't as used to advocating for themselves as me and my wife and our friend was. But these things made it impossible to get where we wanted to go on the first stop on our pilgrimage through Berkeley and parts of the Bay Area to live into the civil rights of disability. And things like cracked sidewalks and poorly maintained pathways and difficult to read bus schedules stem from people not paying attention. They stem from what we call microaggressions, where people in culture and people of faith and really just people of humanity let the little things slide and don't pay attention to those things that aren't directly important to them. And when we don't pay attention to the things that aren't directly important to us, we let those on the margins, slide back into obscurity and deal with the consequences of that. And while we were dealing with in Berkeley cracked sidewalks and poor bus schedules that made a pilgrimage tough, that was only the beginning of not paying attention. The story in Philadelphia is the end result. Christians must pay attention to those with disabilities, and we must begin to pay attention to those with disabilities not as people to be pitied or healed or infantilized as just inspirational. We must pay attention to the people with disabilities as people with real stories that deserve to be told. And this takes patience. It takes a deliberate act by the people of faith and the human community to listen in a different way, in a deliberate way. Because as the story in Philadelphia goes a long way to proving, and thankfully this young man survived, but this story goes a long way to proving that if we as people of faith don't pay attention, people die. So I encourage you, look around your neighborhoods, look around your communities, listen to those stories. Listen when people need help, caregiving, or telling their own story. Don't assume you can do it for them, but listen for the people on the margins to tell you their own stories in their own way. God bless. Thank you. I'll put this on the Julian Way website, julianway.org, and on Twitter at the Joel Way, and on Facebook, Facebook/the Joel Way. Thanks, guys. Blessings.